question, you may have seen it in the blurb. It said, the question I posed in the little blurb, the advertisement was, we see suicide kind of on the rise in society. We say it's bad, right? And it made the news this last year because the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, they published some data. They're really good at data. And it was looking at the years 1999 through 2016. It saw that suicide across the country rose by about 25% on average. And in more than half of the states across the country, that increase was more than 30% in more than half of the states. Over that period of time, the increase in South Dakota was 44.5%. Our neighbors to the north, in North Dakota, the increase was 57% increase in suicide. If you go to the website, you want to learn a little more about this from the CDC, what they say is, suicide is a serious public health problem that can have lasting harmful effects on individuals, families, and communities. Okay, that's true. 45,000 people took their life in 2016. Some of the data shows that 54% of these people that chose to take their own life, they didn't have a diagnosed mental health condition. At least there was nothing in there. There wasn't anything in their medical record. There's been a six-figure federal grant made to our state epidemiologists to kind of study this a little bit and to understand it a little bit better. If you look at suicide, as I'm kind of going through the website, trying to understand what is the public messaging on this, I see things like the rates rose. What can we do to prevent suicide? Here are the warning signs. Help somebody at risk. It's all suicide's bad. And I'm thinking, why is suicide bad? I mean, we know it is. We know it is, but there's not a public argument being made by the CDC that it is. We just know it is. So then the question is, we're starting to think about this issue a little bit, physician-assisted suicide. Why is it bad in some instances? Well, maybe not in others, So Alexis de Tocqueville, some of you, he's a French guy that came to America in the 1820s, wanted to study our country. His country had just gone through a revolution. Ours had gone through a revolution. We had a greater degree of stability here. His country didn't have the same level of stability. He was curious why. What he said was, no social grouping can prosper without shared beliefs. For society to exist, and all the more so for society to prosper, all the citizens' minds must be united and held together by a few principal ideas. A few principal ideas. So one of these principal ideas, like one of these sort of basic, our founders might call it self-evident truth, is that life is good. Life is good. And that one not ought to take innocent life, even one's own, just as a rule. And so Justice Gorsuch, Neil Gorsuch, as he's writing his book on this, he says, I don't purport that I can prove the existence of basic goods or moral absolutes by reference to logical syllogisms. Meaning that there's not like a 2 + 2 = 4 formula to show this. It just is. It just is. That's why the CDC, when it's talking about preventing suicide, doesn't really explain why it's bad. It just is. That doesn't mean that there's not a lot of evidence that we can go through showing the harmful effects. And that's one of the important things for those involved in the political spectrum to do as they're confronting this issue. Okay, so that's all prologue a bit to some of the legal history of this issue in our country. I want to walk through a little bit of the history of some of the court cases. Now this battle's not in the courts, broadly speaking, right now, but I think if we walk through some of the history, my hope is that we see a little bit of the ground that we're standing upon so that we have a sense of what to do and where we're standing as this issue comes at us in the future. And some of the arguments, they get fleshed out and we get to see what the advocates of assisted suicide are saying. As I go through this, if any of you ever had the thought that maybe you should have gone to law school, I'm going to dispel you of that thought by the end of this little progression. So back in the mid-90s, we all remember Dr. Death. We've got Dr. Kevorkian. It was growing in the public consciousness that there were physicians that actually they wanted to help their patients take their own lives. If that's what the patients desired. So in the state of Washington, there's a doctor called Dr. Glucksberg. Dating back to 1979 in Washington, there was a statute prohibiting assisted suicide, prohibiting another person, made it a felony to help another person commit suicide. Dr. Glucksberg, 3 other physicians, and 3 patients, along with the organization that's now known as Compassionate Choices, challenged the state statute in federal court, arguing it was unconstitutional under the substantive due process doctrine. Now this doctrine comes out of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, one of the post-Civil War amendments. And it says, quote, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, end quote. Now this sounds like it's sort of process-oriented, but as time has gone on, courts have interpreted this to actually have what they call a substantive component, meaning there are some basic rights that we have that arise out of this that are substantive rights, not just like process rights. So even if everything about the process itself is fair, there could be something that is still there. The trial court judge that received this case, or the court of first instance, there's a Judge Rothstein, still living. In order to understand what due process might mean for this challenge, she turned to a case that many of us will remember, Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which had been decided a few years before, 1992. Very infamous passage trying to interpret what is substantive due process, where does it come from, what does it mean. This is Justice Kennedy writing for the plurality of that court. He said that in, quote, matters involving the most intimate and personal choices a person may make in a lifetime, choices central to personal dignity and autonomy, are central to the liberty protected by the 14th Amendment. At the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of its existence, of meaning, of the universe, and of the mystery of human life. Justice Scalia derided this passage as the sweet mystery of life passage, essentially saying, well, what the heck does that mean? But that's what the judge is looking at in this trial court of sort of the first look. The judge, she found this very highly instructive. She said, like the abortion decision, the decision of a terminally ill person to end his or her own life involves the most intimate and personal choices that a person can make about lifetime, in a lifetime, and constitutes a choice central to personal dignity and autonomy. Dignity and autonomy. Those are kind of key rhetorical arguments that are being made even now. So here's just to take a quick time out and kind of poke at the legal reasoning a little bit. So I'm going to ask, like, okay, Judge, if this is like a central right, you know, a constitutional right, why is it just for the terminally ill? Why is it just for somebody that might be experiencing pain and has got a diagnosis? Why isn't it for everybody? Why can't anybody just say, I want to end my life? If it's really a central constitutional right, those are for everybody, right? So, I mean, it's a bit, point being that the reasoning it's got holes in it. The result of that, the trial court, was she overturned Washington's statutory ban on physician-assisted suicide. A divided panel of the Ninth Circuit Court, so the next step up in the review process, overturned her. A man named Judge Noonan wrote for the court. He suggested that if you take Casey's sweet mystery of life passage to its end, you find just absurd results. As he put it, as Judge Noonan put it, quote, if personal dignity and autonomy is the criterion for what is and is not permitted, then everyone in the country must enjoy it, right? So this question I just asked. So regardless if you're competent or incompetent, young or old, healthy or ill, if that's truly a right, it's for everybody. In his words, it would be open to, quote, the depressed 21-year-old, the romantically devastated 28-year-old, the alcoholic 40-year-old. They're all choosing their own view of existence, meaning the universe and of life. So 2.5 years after Judge Noonan in this panel overturned the trial court judge, the Ninth Circuit heard it en banc, meaning it was all the judges on the circuit. So now we're talking like 12, 15 judges. And they overturned Judge Noonan. A guy named Judge Reinhardt wrote for that court. Whereas Judge Noonan had kind of looked a bit at the history of our country in trying to find, is this right really there? Judge Reinhardt explained that, no, actually there is this right in history. Let's go back. We're going to look at the Roman Stoics. We're going to look at Socrates and Cato. It was permissible in some circumstances under Roman law. So he's, and frankly, he's right, isn't he? Like it's there in the history of the law, not American law, but it's there. But Judge Reinhardt really agreed with Judge Rothstein that personal autonomy, meaning I choose it, I want it, that does demand a right, a constitutional right for assisted suicide. In dealing with Judge Noonan's argument that this right would then necessarily apply to all citizens, Judge Reinhardt wrote that the way he dealt with that is he said the state has a legitimate interest in preventing anyone from taking his or her own life, quote, in a fit of desperation, depression, or loneliness, or as a result of any other problem, physical or psychological, which can be significantly ameliorated, which is the fancy legal word for it can be fixed. So let's pause for just a moment. What does that mean? If we take his legal reasoning. So that it would mean that the state has an interest, a compelling interest, in the lives of the healthy, or those that have kind of relatively minor ailments that can be ameliorated. We can fix them. But if you don't have an illness or a disability that can be significantly ameliorated, the state does not have a compelling interest in your life. So, and if you've ever read a little bit of Orwell, it comes to mind, all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others, right? So, and that's why we see today, it's disability rights groups, it's people with disabilities that are really at the forefront of leading the charge against physician-assisted suicide. Another really telling thing that we can just learn about the train of logic and where we're going from Judge Noonan's argument is that he agreed with Judge Noonan made the point that there's no logical distinction between assisted suicide and euthanasia. If it's a right, why can't a person who doesn't physically have the ability to swallow pills, why can't somebody else stick a needle in their vein? There's no constitutional distinction according to your reasoning. Reinhardt, in the en banc review that overturned Noonan, he agreed. He was like, this court isn't going to decide on it right now. Future courts are going to have to decide, but really that is the result. So he acknowledged, that is where this is going. So meanwhile, that's out in Washington. That's Glucksburg. Meanwhile, in Washington, there's a case called Quill. Very similar, a physician who had actually written an article in a big New England Journal of Medicine. He had written an article defending his decision to prescribe a lethal dose of barbiturates to a patient. Like the argument in Glucksburg, Quill relied on substantive due process. He also brought in what they call an equal protection argument. So again, we go back to the 14th Amendment, which also says, nor shall any state deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. So if the law is going to do something for me, it should do the same thing for you. So the plaintiffs in Quill, the argument they made, they said that if a competent person can refuse medical treatment, which is permitted under New York law, even if it will result in death, even if we're pretty sure that it's going to result in death, in order to treat people equally, we have to be able to give them the opportunity to have assistance with suicide. Essentially saying there is no meaningful difference between the refusal of care and the assistance in suicide. So blurring a long-standing ethical distinction between an omission on one hand and an act on another. Saying you have to treat these two scenarios as equal. So in this case, the trial court judge, a guy named Judge Grisa, he wasn't convinced. He said that New York only has to present a rational basis for finding a distinction between these two scenarios. And he said such a rational distinction does exist. He said, on the one hand, we're allowing nature to take its course, and on the other involves intentionally using an artificial death-producing device. And he uses the word device, but we could think of a technological intervention of any sort. Most commonly the lethal dose of barbiturates. So this is, as I said earlier, this is the classic ethical distinction between an omission and an act. So the Second Circuit Court, on review, reversed Judge Grisa and adopted the equal protection argument. So they didn't take up the due process argument, but they tackled equal protection and went with Dr. Quill and the other plaintiffs. It relied on an earlier case called Cruzan versus Missouri. And in that case, that was a Supreme Court case in which the court found that a competent adult could refuse medical care, even if it was likely to result in death by natural illness. So the Second Court essentially dismissed Judge Grisa's distinction between an omission and an act. The Second Circuit found that the difference is irrelevant, quote, because the cause of death is the suicide's conscious decision to put an end to his own existence. So they're focusing really on the desired outcome, or like kind of the foreseeability of what will happen, rather than the intent in the act itself. So, and again, sort of with the classical distinction between an omission and an act, we'd highlight also a difference between foreseeability, okay, refusing care, we can foresee death, even though we don't necessarily intend it, but we take an act for the purpose of death, we're actually intending death. So 1997, okay, we're getting to the end of the court stuff here. 1997, this all builds into one case at the Supreme Court. They consolidated, and Justice Rehnquist is writing for the majority. He's joined by O'Connor, Scalia, Kennedy, and Thomas. What he says in looking at the due process claim is he says, look, in looking at due process and what are fundamental rights, we do take into account the history of our legal traditions. And we have a really strong history in the United States. Jurisdictions have always treated assisting suicide as a felony. Like that's really clear within our common law tradition. And in any event, this personal autonomy stuff, it's not without limits. It's not completely unbounded. So, for example, he says, looking at the Cruzan case, where does this come from, this right to refuse treatment? He says, let's look back at the common law. Back in the common law, where we get our law, the kind of history of Old England, forced medication was considered a battery. So he said, that's easy. There's an easy limit right there. Furthermore, this whole act-omission distinction, he says this is easy too. This comports, quote, with fundamental legal principles of causation. With one, you're omitting treatment. The cause of death is the illness. With the other, the cause of death is the poison that you've put in the person's system. Like that's fundamental within the law, the principle of causation. So a couple of things to learn from this decision, though, that I think are maybe instructive for where we're at today. Justice O'Connor was the only reason that they could have a 5-justice majority. Really, that was it. She wrote her own statement, along with Ginsburg and Breyer, that really, it's been argued, has limited the precedential effect. One of the things that they made clear is that the challenge to these state laws, it was a facial challenge, meaning that they're challenging it in every instance, not as applied. So essentially, they left open the door that, golly, maybe there is, if we're looking at a particular set of facts in an as-applied challenge, if there's something that's truly voluntary, we might have a different outcome here. They kind of hinted at that. And the point for us is that they're really focusing on the truly voluntary nature of the choice. Okay, so that's it for the courts. We're going to take a step out of the courts, and we're going to bring it to kind of present, kind of some of our present lessons and step a little bit into what's been happening. The first big lesson that we get from this is the Supreme Court said, this is off the table for constitutional challenges. That's why we're talking about this right now. That's why all the challenges are coming in the state legislatures of the states. There have been really, all of the challenges are focusing on what we saw kind of a prelude to in these court cases. Principles of fairness and autonomy, personal autonomy, sweet mystery of life. So the last lesson from this case that we're kind of starting to see creep in a little bit, that Gorsuch in his book, he really highlights it, because O'Connor and her colleagues highlighted it in their statement. She showed real curiosity for whether society as a whole would be better or worse off. She wanted to know about the utility. And I bring that word up because, frankly, the word utility gets under my skin a little bit. You know, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning with like this basic question, like, is life good? Is all life good? And is it intrinsic or extrinsic? Is it good in and of itself, always? Or does it derive its value extrinsically, meaning from a condition, a condition that attaches to it? I'm experiencing pleasure or pain right now. My value comes from that, for example. So that I just offer a word of caution with the word utility. Okay, so step into the states for just a minute. So Oregon passed the first, they call it Death with Dignity Act. 1994, it was caught up in the courts for a couple years. It was validated, became law in Oregon in 1997. Then there was a break for about 10 years. Then in 2008, we had Washington, and that was both Oregon and Washington were statewide ballots. In 2009, Montana had a kind of a strange court decision. Then 2013, Vermont was the first legislative, so the state legislature. 2015 is California, also legislative. 2016, Colorado ballot. 2017, DC, and it was legislative in their council. And then this last year, Hawaii, my counterpart in Hawaii has been fighting, he's a Catholic deacon, he's been fighting this literally for 25 years, and just lost the legislature in Hawaii this last year in 2018. And then Deacon Walter retired, he's in his 80s. So, and I don't mean to paint a picture like this is going particularly well. In the same time period, it's been rejected. Physician-assisted suicide proposals have been rejected over 120 times, might be even higher now. Over 120 times by citizens and legislators, including 28 victories in 2017. 28 victories to reject physician-assisted suicide. 2018, in addition to the loss in Hawaii, couple of states have bills pending. One of the ones pending, Connecticut is really taking it to the next level. And a bill that came up in their legislature. Remember that logic, that kind of chain of logic earlier with Judge Noonan and then Reinhardt, with euthanasia being the next step? Connecticut just went there in a bill before their legislature. They said, yeah, assisted suicide and euthanasia. There's no distinction. In Wisconsin and Massachusetts, bills that have been before their legislatures, those bills would have required the physicians to either do it or to refer. So if you're not going to do it, you've got to give a referral. So thinking about, kind of conscience protections for doctors. And kind of strangely, a bill in Delaware their assisted suicide bill, it's specifically approved assisted suicide for people with disabilities. It's kind of specifically called them out, very strangely. So this was circulating in South Dakota. Many of you may be aware. I know many of you are aware because you were working to fight it. There were people that wanted to put it on a statewide ballot. They only got about 8,000 signatures. They needed about 14,000 signatures. That's great in my mind because it means that people were actually, a lot of these petitions were being circulated by the same people who were holding the clipboards for medical marijuana. They cleared the first threshold for signatures with medical marijuana in the vetting process. They didn't quite get the hurdle. But what that means to me is 14,000 signatures for medical marijuana roughly, 8,000 for assisted suicide. Both the clipboards are being presented to people. In my mind, that means that people are thinking before they sign something. They're actually thinking about what it was. So this proposal would have permitted a person to make an oral request to their physician. 15 days go by. Make another oral request to the physician. Following that, you make a written request. Once your doctor gets the written request, that's the end of your doctor's interaction with you as a patient. Your doctor waits 48 hours, sends in the prescription of, it's 100 pills of secobarbital to Walgreens, and then you or your surrogate go pick it up. And ingestion could take place at any point in time and in any place, so long as it wasn't a public place. That was the proposal. A couple of key things to highlight for me, or that I think are really important on the proposal is the death certificate. It would have required the medical examiner to actually not state the true cause of death, which is, it's a lie. So instead of suicide as the cause of death, it would have required an underlying medical illness. Let's say you have a diagnosis of cancer, which is why you want to take your own life. That wouldn't go on your death, or that would go on your death certificate, not the true cause of death, which would be poisoning, self-administered poison. The second thing that really jumped out at me is it said, no state report may refer to any practice under this act as suicide or assisted suicide. So it was telling the state that it can't talk about suicide. It's not to use those words. Why? Why? Remember back to the beginning? Back to the very beginning? The CDC doesn't even need to tell us why suicide is bad. We just know that it is. We just know that it is. And in fact, the Gallup has done polls that Compassionate Choices is using the polling data, that when the word suicide is used, people don't like it. So it's, what is suicide? The CDC actually has a definition for suicide. It's on their website. It's death caused by self-directed injurious behavior with any intent to die as a result of the behavior. So I want to die. I'm going to take this lethal overdose of pills, and it results in my death. That's suicide. Okay. So just a bit about some of the medical association landscape. The Hippocratic Oath dates back, 300 to 500 years BC. So we've had the Hippocratic Oath is this ethical mandate. Physicians, this oath they swear at the beginning of their profession. I don't know if they swear it everywhere yet, but in South Dakota, I think they take a modified oath. And it's been modified to cut out a couple things. One of the things that's in the original oath is that I will not give a lethal drug to anyone if I am asked, nor will I advise such a plan. It's in the Hippocratic Oath, which is why there's a large number, I've got a long list here, I'm not going to go through them all. There's a lot of the professional organizations for physicians and people in the healthcare field are opposed to this. Currently, the American Medical Association is opposed to physician-assisted suicide. In their Code of Medical Ethics, it says, quote, physician-assisted suicide is fundamentally incompatible with the physician's role as healer. It would be difficult or impossible to control, and it would pose serious societal risks. Instead of engaging in assisted suicide, physicians must aggressively respond to needs of patients at the end of life as physicians. So, and then this code of ethics goes on to say, here's what you should do. Don't kill your patients. Here's what you should do. Don't abandon your patients. Once there's a terminal diagnosis, respect patient autonomy. I'll get into it later. That's held in balance with some other ethical obligations. Provide good communication and emotional support. You have to provide appropriate comfort care and adequate pain control. The reason I say that this is their current position is because they are being lobbied hard to change the position. They've directed their committee on ethics and judicial affairs to take another look at the position. The committee's looked at it and said they like it, so they're sending it back to the floor. The delegates, the full body of delegates, is leaving it in committee because they don't have the votes right now. So they keep voting to keep it in committee. And it's, I don't remember the exact numbers offhand, but the vote is pretty close. Why is this important? Doctors are really persuasive to legislators. I can just say that having witnessed it with my own eyes, sitting in a committee room, watching testimony last year, is they have credibility for their profession. State groups, so we've got state medical associations. I think the South Dakota State Medical Association has been asked to consider reversing their current opposition. They've said no, we want to keep it. I don't know the details of some of those discussions, but their opposition stands. State medical associations that have either reversed their position and said we now support it, or have gone neutral. And just to be clear, going neutral is the same thing as supporting it. You're either for accompanying your patients in a difficult time of life, or you're not. So neutral is not good. It's California, Colorado, Maryland, Maine, Massachusetts, DC, Nevada, New York, Oregon, and Vermont. So, and the lessons have shown, places like California and Vermont, once doctors flip, the legislature follows. Just a note about financial interests in all this. It's kind of let's follow the money for just a minute. Because there's frankly, there's an industry, there's a healthcare industry, and it's good, money is part of it. But there's always been a bit of an financial interest in the history of suicide even. It used to be that if somebody committed suicide, their estate was forfeit to the crown, for English common law. The coroner, the person who determined if it was a suicide or not, the coroner got a shilling for every suicide. 2011, the United States spent $2.7 trillion on healthcare, more than double what was spent in 2000. It's projected by 2040 we're going to spend 1 out of 3 healthcare dollars in the United States of America. 1 out of 3 dollars in the United States of America is going to be healthcare. 1 out of 3 dollars in this country is going to be spent on healthcare every year. So back to Glucksberg and Quill for a minute. Walter Dellinger, he was the Solicitor General that was arguing before the court. He said, quote, "The least costly treatment for any illness is lethal medication." End quote. Isn't that true? It's like, and for those of us that have been with family members towards the end of life, it gets expensive. And this is really borne out, and sadly, places like Oregon and California. A sad, somewhat recent case, a woman named Stephanie Packer. She was diagnosed with, it's called terminal scleroderma. It's where essentially scar tissue builds up in your lungs. So let's see, this was 8 years ago. She was diagnosed at 29, 4 kids, given 3 years to live. She's now 37, praise God, she's still living. But after 4 years of fighting this illness, her doctors suggested that maybe switching treatment a little bit might buy a little more time to a different, I guess it's a chemotherapy type treatment. It was going to cost like $4,000 a month. And her insurer in the state of California said, we don't cover that. She asked the question, do you cover assisted suicide? Yes, it's $1.20. So this is, it's completely unsurprising. We don't need the facts pierce us, but the Solicitor General of the United States made this point in the mid-90s to the Supreme Court. And it's happening, it's not just California, it's Oregon too with their state health plan. Famous case of a woman named Barbara Wagner. She she's now deceased. She was fighting lung cancer. She had beat it once and it came back. And her doctor had suggested a pretty, frankly, expensive course of treatment. And she literally got a letter in the mail denying coverage, but in the letter it said, we won't cover this, but we will cover that. And we'll cover the full $50 cost of this. So, and so actually she went public. The drug company ended up giving her a year's free, treatment. She later passed away. Compassionate choices. One of the things that they learned was to be a little more tactful. So they're gonna speak nice so long as people are expecting them to. So that kind of leads me into a wrap up. Who is this? Compassionate choices. I've alluded to them a little bit. Who are they? Well, their president, Barbara Coombs Lee, she wrote Oregon's law back in the early 90s. She's now their president. They took Glucksberg to court. She has said that providers who withhold vital information about treatment options must be held accountable. So they want to start twisting doctors' arms, and they're calling this a treatment option. To take your own life is a treatment option. Their fall magazine. So just taking a look at okay, let's be a bit strategic about this. What's their strategy? This is out of their fall magazine. We have our sights set on several lofty long-term objectives, including perhaps the most ambitious one, making sure that within 10 years, medical aid in dying is an open and accessible medical practice for half the U.S. population. So that is ambitious, half the population in 10 years. So honestly, South Dakota, we're a bit of, we're small fish. They want New York, they want New Jersey, they want Massachusetts. My counterpart in Massachusetts, the Cardinal Archbishop of Boston, Sean O'Malley, has told Jim, the number one priority for the Catholic Conference is to keep physician-assisted suicide off the books in this state. That is your number one priority. It's the Cardinal that's literally working the phones, raising money to oppose this. Because and they are by the skin of their teeth in their Capitol buildings. So they're coming for us. We may not be big fish in their eyes, but that's their goal. They're motivated. Their tactic is this. Remember, it's back to the statute. Actions taken in accordance with the act shall not for any purpose constitute suicide, assisted suicide, mercy killing, or homicide. We don't use the word. So you go to their website, it's all about medical aid in dying. They don't use the word. So words have power, words have meaning. I'd love to be able to spend a little more time going through all of it, but that's my last takeaway, is that the words have meaning, the words have power, and we'll maybe just keep a couple minutes for questions if you have any. Yes, ma'am.
If the right to life is endowed to us by our Creator, then wouldn't the right to die have to come from our Creator?
The right to die.
If we get life through our Creator, is the only way for us to die that our Creator decides that? The founding fathers put that in there.
Yeah, you're making an argument for authority. Who ultimately has authority over our lives? And so the question was put to me last week. I was visiting with a group out in Rapid about this, and everybody in the group was kind of on board, but a lady was kind of throwing some stuff back at me because she's been engaging with some of her friends, and she just went through a years-long process with her mother. It was a very difficult time, frankly. It was hard. That's just the honest truth. It was hard to care for her mother. Her friend said to her, "Our dogs get cancer, and we don't want them to suffer, so we end their suffering. Why can't we do that for people? Why can't we? Because people aren't dogs." That's the answer. Because people aren't dogs. But you're right, and sometimes because we have such a long and strong tradition of rights in our country, sometimes that word gets a bit convoluted. What is a right? What does it mean? Where does it come from? And when they flip the conversation on its head and say you have a right to die, what they're saying is you have a right to have somebody else help you end your own life. So, sir.
In the Trinity decision, the Supreme Court was commissioned to study the ideology that laid the foundation for American government. Every country, their laws are based on the predominant religion of that country. And ours, the Supreme Court ruled after reviewing 35,000 quotes, and the Bible was referenced 34 times more than all the others put together. The Judeo-Christian principle was the foundation on which our whole basis of law was based. So what's happening then is that we elect secular humanist politicians who appoint secular humanist judges, who basically are redefining what the Trinity decision basically exposed as the foundation of our government.
Yeah.
And so that's it all comes down to worldview.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's a great point, and you'll notice that. So I represent the two bishops of South Dakota, the South Dakota Catholic Conference. I didn't talk about God at all. I didn't talk about salvation in Christ. I very specifically want to use language that's accessible to everybody. And the way the Catholic Church approaches it is we've got faith and reason, so that our faith illuminates our reason. But there's actually a reasonable basis for all this. But if you really drill down into it and you ask, like, okay, life is good. As Gorsuch put it in his book, I can't prove this. There's not like a logical syllogism. There's not a 2 + 2. You just have to accept it. We actually have to have some of these basic things that we all kind of agree on if we're going to move forward together in our country. But what the point you've raised is really one for missionaries to hear, because it's absolutely true. So, Dale.
Yeah, seems to me, Chris, that when assisted suicide is not just an elderly phenomena, but it's an all-of-life phenomena where at any age someone can be assisted suicide by a physician. And I think that to say that there may not be a bill on a physician-assisted suicide at the legislature this year, I think this is almost ties into Simon's Law in a roundabout way.
I think it does. So Dale's point is about this isn't just about the elderly. They're particularly vulnerable because the great fear is that this so-called right to die, it's going to become a duty to die. I'm a burden. Now I have to do this because I don't want to be a burden on anybody. But it absolutely, if you really let's take the logic to its conclusion, we don't have to look very far. Just across the pond, Luxembourg, Denmark, Holland. It's not just assisted suicide, it's euthanasia. It's euthanasia where a surrogate is making the decision, not the person. And in fact, there are a significant number of documented cases where they don't actually have a record of consent, even from a surrogate. So, and we're not talking about just the elderly, we're talking about the disabled. We're talking about infants, disabled infants, minors. It's not physical, it's not just physical issues, it's psychological, we're talking mental health, psychiatric. So it's very, very dangerous, and it's dangerous for everybody. Like we're all in this together, really. Sir?
Won't there be a lot of holes in a bill like that? Like, if I have $1 million life insurance policy?
Yeah, there'd be a lot of holes in the bill, and frankly, I deliberately, so there's a citizens group kind of fighting this when the petition was circulating, and the leader, Fred Deutsch, was kind of heading this up, and he had a great PowerPoint presentation he was giving that went through he was hammering all the little political holes in the bill, and those absolutely we have to attack this thing upside down every day of the week, twice on Sunday. So those are all valid attacks. I specifically focused here on some of the big picture, logical, let's look at the big arguments. So, Doctor?
I assumed, or I understood before last session in January that the State Medical Association Board of Delegates decided to change their position to neutral rather than against it. Against the AMA's position. Are you aware of that, or is that changed?
Are you talking about with the South Dakota State Medical Association? I didn't know that they actually had taken the step to go neutral. If if that's the case, I'd be very interested to learn more. So that, what I was aware is that a physician from Sioux Falls had gone to a committee meeting of the State Medical Association to make the case. But my understanding, there was no action was taken following that meeting.
Thank you.
So, yeah, I would be, so my other kind of takeaway, my first takeaway for you all is language. We cannot give up the fight on the language, because that's, whatever the social issue is, something they want to shift language on us. We have to keep the language. Point two is, you better know where your doctor stands, and your doctor better know this is important to you. Because this is, I see that profession as being the fundamental battleground where this is playing out. And that, you know, and some people make the point, maybe we should just call it assisted suicide, not physician-assisted suicide. If we call it physician-assisted suicide, that gives it some legitimacy. I could be wrong, but my point is like, no, this is wrong, and they need to be tied to it. This is their thing. They've got a vested interest in killing this. So, Ms. Mann.
About a year and a half ago, my sister was hospitalized with severe lung damage as a result of chemo, and she was placed in hospice care. So I watched them increase the amount of morphine that she was given to relieve the symptoms or the effects of reducing the amount of oxygen that she had until she passed away a day later. And at that time, and still today, I still wonder, how is that different from assisted suicide?
Good question. So the question was, a sister was dying in pain. Medical staff administered morphine to relieve pain. They administered morphine to relieve pain. Ethicists call it the doctrine of double effect, meaning we know, although morphine, what it does is it numbs pain, but it also can reduce your ability to breathe. Some people can develop like a bit of a resistance, so they still can breathe. Others, we just know that it will hasten their death. It will cause them to die sooner than they otherwise would. Remember earlier we talked about both the act and the intent, and both are important. So the purpose of the act is to relieve pain. Death is something that's foreseeable but not intended. Whereas the administration of swallowing 100 capsules of secobarbital, what that does is it causes you, the only possible reason you would do that would be so your body is no longer alive. So that, yeah, I mean, and there's,
I was just gonna say, at the same time though, they were reducing the amount of oxygen that they were giving her. So they were really, in fact, speeding up her death. It wasn't just relieving the pain, but they were.
yeah, and to be clear here, I'm not making an argument that we need to take all extraordinary measures to preserve his life for as long as possible. It's a gift from God, and we're all going to die at some point. I know you've been waiting back there.
There's another thing we need to think about. There's been instances where the decision was taken out of the parents' hands years ago, one in Florida, and recently one in England, where the parents had no say whatsoever, and their children were murdered.
Yeah, stay tuned for Dale this session. I guess South Dakota Right to Life is going to talk a little bit about that. Maybe one more question, and I know Norman wants to wrap us up.
I was going to ask that same question that she had, because I was a nurse in long-term care.
Yeah.
And when a resident was declining and death was inevitable, we were at the stage called giving comfort measures.
Yeah.
And the comfort measures was morphine, and it was explained to the family, you know that this will probably hasten your mom or your dad's death, but she will be more, or he will be more comfortable. And I was uneasy about that, but yet the comfort measures were being given, and but death was being hastened, and I was aiding in it.
Sure.
With the family present. And I never ever think that any of that kind of behavior should be legislated. I think it should be taken as a personal decision with the doctor or the family.
Sure.
But the doctors support that.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it certainly has a little bit of an odor connected to euthanasia, but by the same token, you're giving cares that aid in comfort and in not only to the patient, but also help the stress of the family.
Yeah. It's these are really difficult decisions, and they're very
They're
personal.
tough.
Yep, they're very difficult. Just, again, the ethicist would distinguish between what are you intending and what can you foresee. So, and that's maybe it.
Go
So,
ahead.
but, sorry, Norman's giving me the green light.
Go ahead, if you,
Rick,
yeah,
My
okay.
question is more
Yes, ma'am.
resource-based, so you talked
Sure.
about the importance of like the Doctors Association and Medical Association have their stance on this. What are good ways for like action points for us? Like how is a good way to is it just maybe contacting them and saying, you know, I would like to continue supporting, like standing against this, or what are good ways for us to take action in our community?
yeah, I would say next time you're in your doctor's office, you can just say, hey, I was at this presentation, I heard about this, what do you think about it? And they can say, well, they're gonna wanna hear what you say first. So they're gonna say, well, I don't know, what do you think? And then you're gonna tell them what you think, and you're gonna say, this is really, really important to me. And if you don't agree, let me know right now, because I might have to, find another provider, frankly. So that's one thing. The other thing is, you can get on, just to stay in the loop, there's a group called Patients' Rights Action Fund that does a really good job of just staying on top of things nationally. And a couple other, that's just one among many, so.
So you have a sample like living will laws. Now, living wills are worded in a way that gives some third party the authority to make a decision whether you should live or die, not the loving parent or loving relative. And you have examples of living wills that, warnings of what to avoid in reading that types of documents because of how they're worded?
Yes, I do. And where I think I'll end up going with this in the future is there's going to be a section of my website built out for this question because it's, the baby boomers are a tidal wave coming at us in terms of, and many of my counterparts in other states have already done it. One of the diocese of Rapid City has got some good stuff on its website. Just one last comment is, so I used to practice law kind of full-time at a small-town firm, did a lot of elder law. I had a healthcare directive, a living will that was kind of drafted just in line with Christian principles, Catholic, and I used it. I didn't live in a Catholic county. Everybody was Baptist or Lutheran. But I'd read it to my clients, and I would just take out the word Catholic when I was reading it. And it's the recitation of principles. Like, here's kind of how I want my surrogate to make a decision for me at the end of my life. And everybody's like, nodding their heads like, yeah, that's what I believe, that's what I think. So I think there's just a lot of sympathy, there's a lot of overlap in terms of, it's one faith and the principles they're just solid human principles. But if we could exchange information, I could maybe send you some more stuff.